Talk about what's going on with the Beckhams. It feels like a really old story just being told in kind of like this modern worldwide case study. So interesting how often mother-in-law and daughter-in-law get pit against each other, but the problem started way before that. The problem started in terms of why the mom was codependent and enmeshed with her son to begin with. And then when he gets married, it feels like a break in loyalty or like he's abandoning the family system and the mom, but really it's just the natural way that life progresses. It's an individuation process. When he goes and finds his own spouse, it's like the tree branches are now sprouting in a different direction, which doesn't have to feel like being cut off. But in a place where the relationship is based on anxiety and there's a feeling that the love is going to disappear, then the mom can really take it personally and become hypersensitive to all the little details that go on when a son now has a life partner. So important to note that although the daughter-in-law, and I'm so disheartened to see so many even therapists pinpointing that Nicola is the problem, the daughter-in-law often gets dubbed as the issue, but the real issue is actually she's just the scapegoat. She's the symbol of the problems, not the problem itself. Because often an oppressed male offspring, who's kind of his mom's life source, will only find the courage and the ability to truly branch off and kind of address some of the toxicity when he has a stable anchored attachment figure of his own, which is often the partner that comes in. And because she's new energy, she's bringing in fresh ideas and it's changing the whole family dynamic. People really don't like change, so she'll often get targeted as the problem. When a mom depends too heavily on her son or her offspring for emotional regulation, she'll feel displaced by the daughter-in-law. She'll feel like she's being abandoned, even if this isn't the case, and really it could just be a beautiful addition to the family unit because the original dynamics in the family are really unhealthy and codependent. A new person coming in threatens all of that, and the mom really won't like that. When the parents not used to their child ever setting boundaries, but then they start to set boundaries because now they're in a new chapter in their life, they can't very well condone their partner suffering like they've been silently suffering in the enmeshed family system, then they'll take a lack or reduced access as abandonment, where that whole brainwashing narrative comes in, where, oh, the daughter-in-law or the wife is brainwashing and controlling the son because they're not used to this newfound confidence and courage for the person to start calling a spade and calling out the toxic negative behaviors. So of course they need to point the finger somewhere, and it's easier to point the finger at the newcomer rather than take accountability and self-reflect and see if maybe they were making some mistakes as parents. Another massive takeaway from this is that public niceness doesn't represent what's really going on behind closed doors. Another really relatable factor is that perceived image is often the reputation will be protected and no problems will be shown to the outside world. And there's these grandiose displays even in our weddings. Often it's like the epitome of showing just how close and successful and how much the family's thriving. But really, weddings are a time where a lot of stuff that's been simmering and brewing beneath the surface has the opportunity to come up. And that's when a lot of problems arise and conflict can happen, and people can start to hold grudges and resentments towards each other because it's such an emotionally charged event in everyone's life. So even in South Asian culture, how many times have people fallen out and then gone no contact after a wedding? Because weddings basically just expose what's already there. It exposes the unspoken hierarchies, unresolved attachment wounds, and the expectations that were kind of there but never explicitly stated. And then when reality sets in and the offspring goes, well, wait, I didn't actually want my real adult life to just be a continuation of my childhood and all the toxic patterns that were going on, that's when the parents are kind of taken aback and shocked and surprised. And then, of course, they're going to say, oh, the partner's controlling him, the partner's brainwashing him. Here's why women's mental health suffers so much after marriage is because they bear the emotional burden and the weight of stuff that has happened long before they entered the family system. Even if a family after marriage starts to successfully reorganize and a lot of the dynamics sort out, the women will never be able to dispel the labels that she's accumulated through the process. Will often get labeled difficult, controlling, divisive, when in reality, she's just not participating in that old, unhealthy emotional contract. And for the man in the equation, it's even more emotionally taxing because he's in a tug of war between his loyalty and his family ties and the natural individuation process, which he is wired to want to do. Usually, this is kind of the black sheep of the family who experiences it the worst, and the wife of that black sheep will experience the shunning and the labeling the worst, and they might withdraw, go quiet in terms of what the male goes through. Not because they don't care, it's because they never had the emotional autonomy to begin with. They don't have the communication skills. They've always just kind of been an obedient, silent follower of the family system. And usually they're quite empathetic and emotionally intelligent. So they've always been filling and satiating the mom's wounds and needs. Of course, when you feel something slipping through your fingers, you're going to try to grab onto it even harder. So, this is when narratives harden and things get divided and labels are really solidified. Family conflict and tensions rise. Really, just the parents' nervous systems trying to reestablish what's familiar. They don't know how to enter this new type of dynamic, this new type of family system. So they really scramble in all the wrong ways to try to go back to how it was. I think so many women can relate to the fact that this is why a lot of daughter in laws start to feel quote unquote crazy because they've been experiencing this exclusion, this labeling, this villainizing of their character. Can really do a number on your mental health, which is why I do end up seeing a lot of suffering daughter in laws in my practice because the impacts of all the stuff I just talked about are really, really serious on a person's brain and body. Main thing that families need to realize is that evolution is the way that the world has always progressed forward. So even though these old traditions feel familiar and so we have a natural drive to go towards them, we can also make room for how can a fresh perspective or a newer dynamic actually add value to each individual's life and the collective, the family unit as a whole. If a family system requires you to self abandon and it requires you to be very submissive and subordinate and compromise your own happiness, that's not a very healthy family system. So, in my opinion, what Brooklyn's doing is probably his last ditch effort to try to fight back against the tarnishing of him and his wife's public reputation since they are public figures and celebrities. Maybe the details in his public statement were not the most tactful or mature approach, but nonetheless, when you've been silently struggling your whole life and you feel like a product, not a human, then you're not really going to make those wise decisions when you're trying to rectify the situation. What are your thoughts? Do you think the reason that we're all talking about this is because we see a bit of ourselves in the situation? It feels a little bit too like it's hitting close to home. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my analysis. As usual, thank you for watching. See you next time.